Sponsored by the James Madison Council.
I'm LeVar Burton, and this is Open a Book, Open the World, the Library of Congress National Book Festival.
When I try and create a work of fiction, one of my big aims is to create an entire world.
And I think that kind of fictional world and how we see characters express their thoughts and feelings, that for me is opening up the world.
I believe that narrative nonfiction is the closest that many of us will ever get to being another person.
And that sense of empathy is good for anybody, but it's also particularly important, I think, for writers, because that's one of our most important tools, is the capacity for empathy.
I think there's many places that I've met for the very first time through a book.
For me, books were a way of learning about the world and experiencing things I had never experienced before.
Books have always just shown me just how big and how small the world is.
A good book can take you on a journey. And after the last year, we are all ready to plot a new course, and books can be an amazing compass.
An addiction to reading has been a key secret of my success.
It was literature that opened up so many pathways, so many possibilities for me.
I read books so I could discover new worlds in those books.
I have books. I don't even think of like this room. I don't think of having books in, but I have like 50, 60 books in this room.
It's enlarging your horizon. Books are everything.
It gives me more of a complex understanding of humanity, which I think is the power of stories, that we are able to see ourselves in all manner of different character.
And that, I think, is what I enjoy from a great book.
Join me as some of our nation's leading literary voices bring us a sense of renewal, discuss their newest work, and open up a whole new world of possibilities.
Please welcome the Director of the Center for Learning, Literacy, and Engagement, Sherry Werb.
Good evening, and welcome to the 2021 Library of Congress National Book Festival. I'm Sherry Werb, Director of the Center for Learning, Literacy, and Engagement here at the library, and as an avid crossword puzzler myself, I'm thrilled to introduce tonight's event celebrating crossword puzzles. This is the first event we've held in our historic Coolidge Auditorium in over a year and a half. And it feels really good to be back home. So welcome to those of you who are joining us for the first time from down the street or from around the world. We hope you come back for many National Book Festival programs at loc.gov/bookfest. Tonight, we have two stars of the crossword puzzle world joining us on stage. Adrienne Raffel, the author of Thinking Inside the Box, Adventures with Crosswords, and the Puzzling People Who Can't Live Without Them. We'll join New York Times puzzle editor Will Shortz, who has published or edited over 500 books of crossword puzzles. Tonight's moderator is Lulu Garcia Navarro, host of NPR's Weekend Edition Sunday, and is one of the hosts of NPR's Morning News podcast, Up First. Shortz and Navarro have joined up many times for the NPR Weekend Edition Sunday Puzzle, and it's wonderful to have them meet up for the very first time in person on our stage. How cool is that? The event will kick off with a moderated discussion, and we'll leave time at the end of the event for you to ask questions, in person as well as virtually for those live streaming. But of course, in keeping with our puzzling theme, there will also be a fun game for all of you to play here in the audience. Before we begin, let me take a moment to connect you with the library's vast collections. A little demonstration of what is possible when you start exploring your interests here. For example, let's say you're interested in crossword puzzles. When I was reading Adrienne Raffel's book, she talked about the early spread of crossword puzzles by describing how, in 1922, Claire Briggs, a prominent newspaper comic strip artist for the New York Tribune, added to her Movie of a Man series with Movie of a Man doing a crossword puzzle. In her book, Raffel describes a beleaguered solver, cigar clutched in his mouth, pen clutched in his hands, who grows increasingly bombastic in his frustration. Well, I became curious to see this comic strip. So with a little bit of digging on loc.gov, I found it in the Chronicling America Historic American Newspapers collection from our Serials and Publications division. So here it is. Here you see the man getting stuck on 87 across. Northern Seabird. Northern Seabird, starts with an M. Second letter is U. I know all of you are trying to figure that out. Raphael goes on to describe, and he looks up the answer, crows in triumph, and returns to the grid, his smoke spiral chugging in a tidy line again, rather than a frustrated squiggle. But of course, once you type cross space word into the search bar, you start down that beautiful rabbit hole of research. Here's a wild image from our National Photo Company collection in our Prints and Photographs division, published in 1925. Its title, Harry Kahn, Mental Marvel and Daredevil of Keith's Theater, amuses the crossword puzzle fans as he works a puzzle backwards while being hung from the top of one of Washington's tall office buildings. A little more digging revealed that that building was the B.F. Keith Vaudeville Theater, located on the southeast corner of 15th and G Street Northwest. Okay, and finally, I have to play you a snippet of this 1925 recording titled Crossword Mama, You Puzzle Me, but Papa's Gonna Figure You Out. I found this song in the National Jukebox, a project of the library's National Audio Visual Conservation Center. So I'm just gonna play it quickly. It's a little scratchy sounding, but you'll get the tune in a few seconds.
Mr. Rascally, you seem to worry me by all its mystery. Mama, Mama, the way you talk these days, I have to guess your ways. You're like the crossword craze. Crossword Mama, you puzzle me. The Papa's gonna figure you out. You call me honey and that means speed. Looks like I'll be stung, no doubt. You go out calling for an hour or two. I don't know where or when or how or who. Crossword Mama, you puzzle me. But Papa's gonna figure you out. Your Papa's gonna crossword you right now. You better get
You can find so many of these great songs on our website, and I encourage you to go digging into it. But I'll leave it to you to do your own crossword puzzle or other research on our website. But now, please join me in welcoming Adrian Raphael and Will Shortz with Lulu Garcia Navarro.
Good evening. We are so excited to be here in person. It is a wonderful moment. I even put on my pre-pandemic jeans for the occasion, and they fit. So I am particularly thrilled tonight. And it is indeed the first time that I have met this gentleman, Will Shortz, in person after almost 5 years of playing the puzzle with him on air, and it is an absolute thrill. So I am just so excited to see you in person, Will. And thank you again, Adrian, for being here as well. This is a big, big honor. I will just say briefly before we start that when I took over the puzzle at Weekend Edition Sunday, my editor said to me the following thing: hosts come and go, the puzzle is forever. So don't mess it up. I want to start this evening because I think we've just taken a little history tour to find out how puzzles began. And I'm going to start with you, Adrian, and then, of course, we're going to move to Will.
Yes, so it's such an honor and delight and thrill to be here with both of you guys and in this amazing space. But it's so great that the puzzle has this kind of myth of being forever and always. And of course it is forever and always, but the crossword is kind of surprising, or it surprised me when I found out how young it is. The crossword was born on December 21st, 1913, and it was born at the New York World by this editor named Arthur Wynne. And Arthur Wynne was the editor of the Fun section of the New York World. It's called Fun. It was this big supplement in the middle of the world, and he needed something to fill out the holiday, the Christmas edition, and Arthur Wynne was like, oh no, I have this big space, this dead space in the middle of Fun. Oh wait, if I put a blank grid, whoa, amazing, it fills up the space in the newspaper, fantastic, and maybe I can put some clues on the side of that grid to have people fill in the letters, and he called it the word cross puzzle. And a few weeks later, people loved it immediately. They wanted more word cross puzzles. So a few weeks later, kind of serendipitously, the word cross got crossed into the crossed word. And that's how the puzzle originated. It was originally kind of shaped like a diamond donut, and it got tilted into a square pretty quickly. Early on, so yeah, the crossword.
Born in New York.
Born in New York.
There you go, and quickly migrated to the New York Times.
Actually, not the New York Times. The Times was the last major metropolitan newspaper to start a crossword. They actually ran an editorial in 1924 when crosswords became a craze, and the Times ran an editorial decrying the popularity of puzzles and calling it a puerile activity.
Oh,
yeah.
Yeah.
You know, the New York Times was actually the last major newspaper to start a crossword, Metropolitan Daily. And in 1942, just after World War II started, the editors, the publisher, the story goes, decided he was tired of buying the competing New York Herald Tribune to get their crossword. It was time for the New York Times to start their own.
Finally deign to do a crossword puzzle, and of course
the
now.
excuse was the war, to say, oh, you know, these are dark times, the paper is publishing bleak headlines, we need something that gives people solace in the middle of all the bleak headlines, and the puzzle does just that, still does just that.
Let me ask you this, what is it about puzzles that just grabs people? You know, how did it go from being sort of a fad to something that people love to do?
There's lots of answers to that. I think we as humans like to solve problems, and we're faced with problems every day in life. Most of them don't have solutions, but with a crossword puzzle, when you have filled in that last square, it's immensely satisfying. You feel you've achieved something, you've found perfection, which we don't often get in real life.
That's true. Is that what brought you to puzzles initially?
It was
The search for perfection.
It was, I like the playfulness of puzzles. It's escapism. I like to play with words. It's a way of entertaining people without standing on stage and singing or playing the piano or doing a magic act. You know, I prepare a puzzle, send it out into the world, and that's the way I entertain people.
And I really like that because it also is a way of communicating often. You know, you can, as you're solving a puzzle, you can take it and say, oh, what did you think this thing was? You can argue about the way to get to a solution. You can fight about what a solution is. The crossword is, to me, it's really great because it's both a solitary act and it's an act of community, one at the same time. It's kind of rare for activities to get both of those.
And I will say that most of the letters that we get on Weekend Edition are about the puzzle. People are very passionate about the puzzle, and if they feel that I'm disrespecting Will at any point in time, they get very, very upset. What is it like to construct a crossword? I mean, what goes into that? How does it actually work?
I can start with that, and then, of course, you know. But when I was researching this book and talking to constructors, I decided to try my hand at constructing. To me, what I found the most surprising thing was that in my brain, I'm sort of a words and letters person, so I immediately think, oh, how do you clue something? But getting the words to fit into that grid is just an amazing feat. And so I guess what goes into a puzzle, it depends on whether you're starting with a theme or a themeless. So if you're starting with, like, I have a cool concept for a puzzle, that might be the theme that you put in those major answers that you want to get the words to fit around. If you're thinking, I have a super cool stack of 15-letter words that all like get on top of each other, but they don't relate to each other, they're just super cool, that would be a themeless. So, but really it's getting all the words into that grid that I naively, when I first went into try, I was like, oh, it'll take an afternoon, I'll just kind of do it. It took a lot more than an afternoon, but that from that my perspective, and but editing the puzzle, it's then its own other beast.
No, you've described it perfectly. You start with the theme. If it has a theme, then you do your pattern of black squares. You fill in the words, make them as interesting, juicy, colorful as you can, fresh as possible, as little crosswordese as possible, which are those short, vowel-heavy words that we see all the time. And then you write the clues at the end.
I mean, you make it sound easy, Will. I don't think it's quite that easy. But you also edit. And what is that like? I mean, to sort of oversee this vast enterprise that has become the New York Times crossword puzzle section.
Yeah, so every puzzle, I think, has a natural level of difficulty. So when a puzzle is accepted, and we get about 200 submissions a week at the New York Times,
really?
We can only publish 7, so it's fiercely competitive to get an acceptance. But once we accept a puzzle, and there's 5 of us now who are on the editorial group who are deciding this, we slot it for a particular day of the week. Monday is the easiest, builds up, as you know, to very hard on Friday and Saturday. Sunday is the biggest puzzle, but it's like a Wednesday or Thursday in difficulty. When we come to edit, first of all is accuracy. Doesn't matter how interesting or colorful the clues are if they are wrong. And if we make even the slightest of mistakes, we hear about it.
Yes.
So first is accuracy. And after that, we're looking for the right level of difficulty. And then fresh, interesting clues. On Friday and Saturday, we're trying to twist your brain in a new way. It may not feel like it, but puzzle makers and puzzle editors want you to complete the puzzle, but we want you to have to fight to get the solution. And when you get the answer, you feel that satisfaction of,
They're not your friend. They're really not your friend, is what they're saying.
You feel, oh, I'm pretty smart.
Let me ask you this, Adrian. I mean, zooming out a little bit, there is a big, wild world of puzzles out there. There is just an enormous community, and so take us out from, what it's like to make a puzzle to just all the types of puzzles there are and all the kinds of people that, are part of that community.
Well, and what I love so much about the crossword as a puzzle community is I feel like there's really two crossword communities. There's everybody who opens a newspaper or opens their app. Right. There's millions and millions of people, and even if you don't do the puzzle, you have some relationship to it. You've seen that puzzle everywhere. If you see a black and white grid, if you see a subway grid, you've seen a crossword puzzle. So like millions of people are involved in crossword world, and at the same time, there's a robust community of particular to the crossword puzzle. There's people who I know are submitting to Will and to lots of other outlets, multiple puzzles weekly. There's people who are solving puzzles daily and writing about it online. Crossword Twitter is actually one of the, it's really
vicious,
the only.
Vicious. Don't get involved in crossword Twitter.
Vicious, but yet generous.
I was joking.
No, it's really the only place on Twitter where I sort of understand how to read the Twitter, because everybody's just like, oh yeah, they're so excited about when they can clue a particular word or when they see a clue emerge. And then on the other hand, there's kind of garden variety. So I think that the crossword community, and it also touches all fields of study. I'm a poet, I'm a writer. I got into crosswords through my love of words. I find that the people who I talk to who construct crosswords are very, very frequently, there's a music and math, because there's such a, the grid and the clue is a left brain, right brain thing. So, and then people who solve crosswords who are amazing at it, their day jobs are, you know, they're all over the map. So the puzzle community is just for everybody, and you need to know everything to solve a crossword.
I mean, this is, I'm going to come back and ask you this because it is one of the great things that I wonder about, which is like you feel like you need to know everything. I mean, just to come up with the clues, to make them clever, to make them hard enough, but also, you know, I mean, are you looking at popular culture? Are you opening the dictionary? What are you doing to sort of figure this out?
Yeah, almost everything in the world could appear in a crossword. So it helps to have broad knowledge, you know. You should remember things that you learned in school, like, you know, history, literature, geography, classical music, and then it helps to be up on TV, movies, popular music of all sorts, modern slang, politics, everything can appear in the puzzle. And then there's, at the New York Times, we try to have fewer names, I guess, in the puzzles than other places.
But
so,
it's such a big thrill when it happens.
Yeah. Lulu was just mentioning that it's
my name
so
has not
unfair
been in the
that
puzzle.
Ari Shapiro.
Ari Shapiro has been in the puzzle many times because his name is Ari.
And Lulu hasn't appeared yet.
Has not. You've heard it here first. Public shaming, I feel, is my only weapon.
So it helps to know a little of everything.
But some words do appear a lot, and that's because
they're short and they have a lot of vowels. So Ari, A-R-I, and Ira, you know, I-R-A, those are very popular crossword answers. There's the word era, E-R-A, appears in almost 8% of all New York Times crosswords.
Really?
And it's because it has 3 letters, starts and ends in vowels, and there's lots of ways to clue it. You know, it's the time period, it's the laundry detergent, it's the Equal Rights Amendment, earned run average.
Just rattle this off.
Yeah.
There's so many ways to clue it. No one feels bad about putting ERA in a puzzle, so it appears a lot.
And Oreo, I think, is also another one, right?
Well, Oreo is, actually, I was glad you mentioned that because Oreo is this kind of a symbolic word. And Will, you were talking about how crossword has everything in it, and it's, you know, this huge, it's this sort of cornucopia, it's infinite cornucopia, and I feel like it's only growing, and that has become more and more true in recent years and sort of wasn't true historically. There have been periods where the crossword, editors now crosswordese, like these super words that only appear in crosswords, are a little frowned on. It used to be that editors kind of liked them. It was like this special language. The crossword was this like special elite club. But Oreo is a word like era. It's just a fantastic like combination of letters. They just like go with everything. But Oreo,
There's only one clue, right?
Well, that's interesting.
That's what's interesting about Oreo. This is where it comes in. There's only one clue, but
before I started at the New York Times, the Times did not allow commercial names in the puzzle. So Oreo did appear in puzzles, but it was always clued as mountain combining form. So it's a prefix that means relating to mountains.
My favorite are like the really deep cut in jokes that it's just like mountain combining form that appears in crosswords, or like a crosswordy mountain. It's like, okay, people, it's a cookie. It's a cookie.
And is that what you mean by crosswordese? I mean, is that?
Oreo is crosswordese because it's so because it appears in crosswords so much. It's less objectionable though than, because everyone knows Oreo, it's less objectionable than say EDE. It's a Dutch commune, and if you go back to old crosswords, it appears in a lot of crosswords. I don't think I've ever had EDE in one of my puzzles.
Is there things that you're just like, I will never do that. I will, and you just never have.
Yeah. Yeah, there are answers that, you remember the Symbionese Liberation Army? You maybe, yeah, okay. No. So that used to be a common thing, SLA, and I decided when I started, SLA is not going to appear in a crossword again.
Fair enough. I think that's okay. We have something exciting that we're going to do here. We're going to play a bit of a puzzle. and you all are going to participate. And they are going to lead it. So this is interactive, so enjoy. I will not be participating.
So here's how it works. It's called Crossword Call My Bluff. Adrian and I made this together. We're going to read you some facts about the history and culture of crosswords, and you decide if they're true or not, because some of them we made up ourselves.
Sorry.
First, we'll go through them all quickly so you can think about them, and then for each one, we're going to invite you to raise your hand if you think they're true or false. If there's anybody who gets all the answers correct, you'll win a prize.
Woo!
All right, Adrian, you start. Say again.
Is it a lapel pin? Ah, look at you. Not today.
All right, so the first fact. One of Walt Disney's early animated short films featured a crossword. In 1925's Alice Solves the Puzzle, little Alice attempts to fill in a stumper. Despite distractions such as a rowdy chase up a lighthouse involving a peg-legged villainous bear, she eventually triumphs.
That's your first fact to think about. Number 2, membership in the Baker Street Irregulars, the classic coterie of Sherlock Holmes enthusiasts, is by invitation only. The Society's first test for admission is solving a crossword with Sherlock Holmes themed clues.
So number 3, Vladimir Nabokov, who wrote the very first crosswords in Russian, once penned a butterfly-shaped puzzle in a letter to his wife, Vera.
Number 4, for nearly 2 decades, J.R.R. Tolkien and C.S. Lewis wrote cryptic crosswords together, sending them to friends and family in annual Christmas cards.
I keep on hoping all of these are true.
Number 5, the popular 1960s, 70s R&B singer Sly Stone once issued a single titled Crossword Puzzle with the repeated lyric, "The world's a crossword puzzle to me."
Here's number 6. Crossword Puzzle was also the title of a 1984 song by Barbara Mandrell, which peaked at number 11 on the Billboard Country Chart. The lyrics begin, "What we've become is one across, and also rhymes with rules. 2 down is what we tell that's opposite the truth."
Unfortunately, here's number 7. Unfortunately, not all singers love puzzles. On Savage Remix, the 2020 track by Megan Thee Stallion featuring Beyonce, Queen Bee declares, "Always keep my words. No, I don't do crosswords."
Number 8, in the 1950s, the Soviet magazine Oganyuk printed crosswords with propagandistic clues like what warmongers fear more than anything else, and the answer was peace. And the street in which warmongers dwell, the answer was Wall.
So number 9, Henry Molaison is one of the most famous patients in modern medical history. Because of an experimental lobotomy, he had retrograde amnesia, meaning he couldn't form new memories. But one thing HM'd always remembered loving is crosswords. Shockingly, researchers found that he actually could form some new memories when he solved the same puzzle over and over, answering clues he shouldn't have known.
And here's number 10, your last one. The longest known New York Times crossword solving streak belongs to Elizabeth Mosley. Her record stretched from October 2, 1951 to December 16, 1968, or 13,590 days. On the day Mosley missed, she couldn't get the paper in time and was devastated. However, later she admitted that the break was actually a relief.
And that is a good note to end it on.
All right, now let's, that was your chance to, your time to say if you think these are true or false. The first one was about the Walt Disney, that his first animated short, that he had an early animated short film, Alice Solves the Puzzle. How many think that is true? Raise your hand. And how many think it's false? Adrian, which is it?
It's true.
Okay.
And you can watch it.
Number 2 is about the Baker Street Irregulars, that for admission, you have to solve a crossword with Sherlock Holmes-themed clues. Who thinks that's true? Raise your hand. Who thinks that's false? Adrian?
Indeed, that's true.
It's true. Is there anybody in the audience so far who has answered both correctly? All right, we have a few.
Not keeping tabs, so it's honesty.
Here's number 3. Vladimir Nabokov, who wrote the very first crosswords in Russian, once penned a butterfly-shaped puzzle in a letter to his wife. How many think that's true? And how many think it's false?
That's true. Speaking of crossword rabbit holes, that's a fun one.
I was very excited. I didn't know if it was true or false, but I wanted it to be true.
You want it to be true.
I know, you do want it to be true, and it is.
For nearly 2 decades, Tolkien and C.S. Lewis wrote cryptic crosswords together, sending them to friends and family in Christmas cards. Who thinks that's true? Who thinks it's false?
That's false. Although, I would love to see those Christmas cards.
Is there anybody in the audience so far who's answered all 4 correctly? Oh. Okay. All right. Well, if anyone gets 9 out of 10, you'll get a prize.
Yeah.
You're still in the running. Sly Stone once issued a single-title crossword puzzle with the repeated lyric, "The world's a crossword puzzle to me." Who thinks that's true? Who thinks it's false?
True.
Absolutely true.
Absolutely true.
And Crossword Puzzle was also the title of a 1984 song by Barbara Mandrell, which reached number 11 on the Billboard Country Chart. Who thinks that's true? Who thinks it's false?
True again.
Also true.
Also true.
Unfortunately, not all singers love puzzles. On Savage Remix, the 2020 track by Megan Thee Stallion, featuring Beyonce, Queen Bee declares, "Always keep my words. No, I don't do crosswords." Who thinks that's true? Who thinks it's false?
Yeah, it's true.
Also true. Does anyone know the song? Okay, just checking.
Megan Thee Stallion fans here, I'm shocked.
The number 8 was the Soviet magazine Oganyak did in the 1950s, published propagandistic crosswords. Who thinks that's true? Who thinks it's false?
Again, true.
Also true.
Yeah.
Henry Molaison, the medical patient, had an experimental lobotomy which created amnesia, but they found that crossword puzzles, if he solved them repeatedly, that he would remember things he shouldn't have known. Who thinks that's true? Who thinks it's false?
It's weirdly, wildly true. Yeah.
Crazy, crazy, crazy.
It's really weird.
The last one was Elizabeth Mosley having a New York Times solving streak of 13,590 days. Who thinks that's true? Who thinks it's false? Nope, I made that one up myself. All right, no one got all 10. Did anyone get 9? Did anyone get 8 right? Did anyone get 7?
Oh.
We have...
Did anyone get 8? 7 or 8?
How many people?
8.
Oh, someone got 8?
Yes.
Okay, come up after the show and get your prize.
After the show, congratulations. We have to do this. What's your name? Alex. Congratulations, Alex. I have a question before we're going to go to the question and answer section. So if you do have questions, we're going to set up some microphones for those here, and we'll also be taking questions from our virtual audience. But before we do that, I want to ask you this because I got you here. What is different about doing a crossword puzzle for, a paper or digitally and for the radio?
Yeah, when I was asked to do the puzzle at the start of Weekend Edition Sunday by Susan Stamberg in 1987, I had to think what kind of puzzle would work on the radio. It can't be a crossword. It can't have any writing or a picture of any sort. And it needs an immediate answer because you don't want long periods of silence on the radio.
No, you don't.
So I came up with a format of quick word teasers in the early days with Susan and the start of Leanne Hansen. I quizzed them. And
I'm so glad that's not the case anymore.
And Leanne realized that came to two conclusions. Number one, she was in a no-win situation. If she can't solve the puzzles I give her, she looks stupid. And if she does solve them, then she's a smartass, and no one likes either one. And also she found that involving the listeners would be a way to connect average people, everybody, all listeners with the program. So it was her idea to bring in the listeners in the puzzle segment. And that's the way it's always been.
And that's the way it's always been. And just one more question about that, which is, you often have contributors there too. How do you determine who gets to contribute? I mean, I imagine you get a lot of people wanting to, always be chosen. So do you try and spread it around, spread the love?
Well, if someone submitted a lot of puzzles, I would keep using their puzzles. What makes a great challenge puzzle is something you can't solve it too quickly, but it should eventually be solvable. Also, I like to give a nugget of something to work with. A lot of the challenges that are submitted to me as possibilities are things basically that require a computer to, you set up your computer program and it'll churn out an answer. That's not fun for an average listener. It should be something that you can wrap your mind around and start thinking about. And there's one other important thing. I imagine that people who are listening to Weekend Edition Sunday are either lolling in bed.
This is who he imagines our audience to be. Okay, good to know.
Making breakfast.
Okay, fair
or
enough.
Driving to church. And so it should be a puzzle that you can hold in your head. If it's a challenge that you have to go and write down, then that's too much.
Yeah, fair enough. Okay, so if you have any questions, we are going to set up, actually we're going to have someone pass around the microphone on either side. So please let us know if you have any questions here for our guests. This is your big opportunity. Hold on, we're just going to make their way down and pass you the microphone, sir.
I think, Mr. Short, at one point you said those who have studied or are knowledgeable about history, literature, or even classical music, people who go to the Coolidge Auditorium here in the Library of Congress, they are the ones who are most successful in creating and solving these puzzles. Do you see a generational difference because today's universities shun liberal arts in favor of STEM, for example, and then it seems to be an evolving thing where great literature, history, classical music is kind of disappearing?
Is the younger generation bad at puzzles, Will?
I think
we should bring the generational conflict here.
I think it's just the opposite. First of all, a crossword reflects life and everything that you should know. In the older puzzles, you expected to know only the classical subjects, I'd say. Now you're expected to know everything. You have to know the old stuff, and now you have to know everything that's going on in the world. And in the whole history of the New York Times crossword up to me, there are only 7 teenagers known to have been published. I've just published my 50th teenager. And my sense is that the average age of solvers has been coming down. It used to be, I think, in the low 50s. Now I think the average is in the 30s. And it's everywhere from smart teens up to as old as people get.
And
So-
that goes for constructors. I mean, constructors and solvers alike.
Yeah.
Like, yeah,
Yeah.
And I think it's, I mean, I feel like I keep meeting more and more and more younger and younger and younger people who are bringing smarter and smarter crosswords to the table, both solving and puzzling.
And I think the crossword is ideally suited for the modern age because a typical weekday puzzle has 76 answers, every one on a different subject. You know, people think that People nowadays have short memories, and crosswords, your mind jumps from one thing to the next. So I think crosswords are ideally suited for the modern age. And I think a lot of people, more people than ever today, have jobs that use their minds, especially computer programmers. So that's another reason I think that crosswords are more popular now than they have ever been.
Fascinating. Okay.
Hi. As someone who enjoys crossword puzzles and Megan Thee Stallion, I feel like I should ask a question on behalf of those people. When you look to puzzles, particularly about pop culture, where are you looking for pop culture to be inclusive to all people who enjoy crossword puzzles?
Yeah, I think with the New York Times and probably everywhere, we want crosswords to reflect the audience. So anything that would appear in the New York Times is fair game for the crossword. And I think we try to be as inclusive as possible.
I think definitely, Adrian, we are seeing puzzles be, embraced by all sorts of different sort of races and ethnicities. I know, like on Weekend Edition, we get people calling in all the time. But I do think that there is a thing about like where clues, tap into. People's cultural touchstones are different, and it is, and everything is very atomized. I think going to your earlier question, I do think young people are getting a lot of information from different types of places, and they're seeing different kinds of information. And so, I do wonder, like, is it TikTok? Is it TMZ? Like, are you on TikTok, Will?
Actually, I'm not on TikTok, no.
That's a surprise.
I think one of the coolest things about the crossword, too, is this way that it, literally has to cross all modes of culture. And I think it seems to me that editors and constructors and solvers, now more than ever, are really aware of bringing all kinds of diversity. So you're going to have, an ancient Roman author jump cut crossed with a TMZ TikTok reference, jump cut crossed with maybe an indigenous author. Like, there's like all of these references get to live in one space, and all of these modes of thinking get to live in one space. And I find that to be really inspiring about the way that the crossword really, as a form, as a technology, engenders diversity.
Do we have anyone online?
We have a question here from Sarah. Have you ever invited a guest to edit or submit a puzzle? And could we have a Megan Thee Stallion and Will Shortz remix? Because that would be savage.
Ah.
Yes, please.
We like that.
What was the question?
The question was, have you ever invited someone to edit the puzzle? But I didn't get what the actual question was.
Second part to the question is, could we have a Megan Thee Stallion?
Oh, okay. So have you ever invited, do you have guest editors come in?
No, we don't have guest editors. No. At the New York Times, nope, I'm the editor. And there's an editorial team of 5 of us now. I'm the final editor.
Yeah.
But
he's like, no one's coming on to guest edit. That's fair enough. Another wound in my heart. That's all I have to say about that. Yes.
Being, a puzzle master on NPR week in and week out and for many years, is it difficult coming up with a new puzzle each week, or do you find yourself, going back into your archives and pulling up old ideas and updating them?
35 years.
Yeah, it's like in January it'll be 35 years I've been doing this. And yeah, it is hard to come up with something fresh every week. Some of the puzzles they're always new, but they can take old ideas with new examples of them.
I've been pushing him for a singing puzzle because I like to sing the clues.
So we're going to have another singing puzzle soon. We'll also have another Spanish language puzzle soon.
Yes.
Because Lulu can pronounce Spanish much better than me, much better than I can.
And I enjoy it. It's So I always see my role on Weekend Edition. I'll tell you a funny story. So I get the warning right at the beginning of my stint as host that the puzzle remains, hosts come and go. And we know what that means. We know what that means. So, but I still come in and I think, oh, wouldn't it be fun to get like a celebrity puzzle? Wouldn't it be exciting to, maybe we could have a guest come on, as somebody, once in a while to come and, spice it up. So we do this a little bit. We have a few people come in. And then I'm walking one day to work, and these two women are walking next to me, and NPR building is there, and I'm about to walk in to work on a Saturday, and they're like, oh, do you work in there? And I said, yes, I do. And they're like, oh, well, do I know you? And I said, oh, I'm Lulu Garcia Navarro. I work on Weekend Edition. Oh, yes, that's fantastic. Wait a second. Did you put the celebrities on the puzzle? Are you crazy? What have you done to that? The puzzle was perfect. Why are you bringing? And they wouldn't let me go. They hounded me up the street until I promised to stop the celebrity version of the puzzle, and that was the end of that. I took my cue, and I will never, ever, ever mess with the puzzle again.
I thought that was not a bad idea.
It was my solemn vow. Well, people were unhappy that they were like, regular people make the puzzle shine, and you should always give them their moment. Okay.
I have two quick questions, if that's okay. The first one's for Will. You discussed you have an editing team and review process, and generally, if the answer is wrong, it doesn't go in the puzzle. How do you decide if an answer is wrong? Like, what are your sources? Or you can have a healthy debate on, yeah, this answer makes sense, or it doesn't, or do you look it up, in a certain database, that sort of thing?
I have a very nice library, reference library, and I think it's better than a lot of the libraries. And it used to be one of my big advantages as a puzzle editor. I could look up interesting things, facts to write clues about. Now, of course, you can find virtually anything online. So I do use dictionaries. I know my reference books so well that sometimes it's just faster to pull the book off the shelf and look it up that way. But then, of course, there's just so much you can find online. Does that answer your question?
Confess, Wikipedia.
We do use Wikipedia, but that's not the final source.
Yeah, I was just wondering, like, can your team debate and convince you otherwise? Like, no, this is really a true statement or a true clue.
Do we debate? It's whether it's, so I'll tell you the process. After the puzzle is edited in a typeset, it goes to 3 test solvers, one of whom rechecks every word and fact after me or after us. And then after that, the puzzle goes to the contributors so that they have a chance to weigh in on the puzzle. And it also goes to a new diversity panel, and they weigh in on their opinion whether they feel the puzzle is balanced.
Oh, thank you. And just another quick question for both of you. Do you have a favorite, like, all-time clue or top 3 that you've just, always, like, this just brings you joy? This is the best clue ever?
I like that question.
All-time favorite clue is difficult. I think maybe I can speak to, an all-time favorite puzzle. We didn't even talk like visual puzzles, but Liz Gorski had a puzzle in the Times that's shaped like the Guggenheim Museum. So it's all in, the puzzle is a sort of a spiral shape to mirror the Guggenheim Museum, and there's art that's hung in the museum by the clues, and so I just find this to be a beautiful example of, it doesn't break any, it's still a crossword puzzle, it's still within this form, but it's just, it stretches what a crossword puzzle can do just by this kind of marriage of the visual and the content. And I think that's just one it's kind of a super simple idea, but it's just executed so brilliantly. I love that.
And my all-time favorite clue, and you can find this on my Wikipedia page, is the answer was spiral staircase. And my clue was, it may turn into a different story.
Oh. Do we have an online question?
Coming from Kay, excluding puzzles, what is your favorite genre for pleasure reading?
Pleasure reading.
What word is that?
Oh, well, I will just give just a shout out in general to poetry, and because I think that actually crossword puzzles can act like poems in this way of making your brain do all these different kinds of connections, and you can just, it's formal constraint that becomes limitless.
I guess my favorite is real life mysteries.
Yeah.
Fair enough. And I have to read a book a week for my show, so, which I enjoy very much, but pleasure reading, you know, it's
No
mostly
such
for
thing.
work. Yeah, no such thing. Yes, I'm sorry, yes.
Do you use the app or only on paper?
I like to solve puzzles on paper because I like the tactile sense, the pleasure I get that is different from typing.
And how popular is the app versus the, I mean, do you know, like, percentage-wise what it breaks down to?
I know the New York Times Crossword has more than 750,000 digital subscribers.
Wow. What?
I have to make a plug for the app because of the competition factor, because you can see your time solved immediately, and then you can, you know, theoretically text one's friends or one's family members. Theoretically.
Not that anyone on
that anyone
the
would
stage might have done that.
No one would.
Do we have another online question?
This question is from Nick. What are the most egregious errors you've ever seen in a crossword?
Oh.
That's something we hate to talk about. The one that, there's about 4 or 5 errors that appear in the New York Times crossword every year, on average. The one that sticks in my mind the most, the answer was Rupp Arena, R-U-P-P-A-R-E-N-A, and I'm originally from Indiana. Rupp Arena, I know, is from the University of Kentucky, and my clue is something like a Louisville landmark. And this was back in the 1990s. I did a cursory Google search. I did Louisville, Rupp Arena. There were, you know, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of hits. I thought that had verified the fact. But unfortunately, the Rupp Arena is in Lexington, which is where the University of Kentucky is, and they play a lot of their away games at the Rupp Arena. So I felt like for a week of letters that came in that I was the only person in the world who did not know where the Rupp Arena was.
Do you have an answer to that? Do you know anything that sticks to mind?
A favorite egregious error. Well, the very first crossword puzzle, that Diamond Donut, it used the same word. It's like the word, I think, is dove, and it's clue. The same word appears twice in the crossword grid, and that just would become a totally egregious error. So the first crossword violated the rules of the game it would then populate. So
that's a good
errors
one.
are always part of the crossword.
They were trying to be, they had the word D-O-V-E twice. Once clued as the bird, and once clued in the sense of dived. But you can't get away with that.
No, not so much.
All right. Sorry.
Hi. As someone who enjoys puzzles but finds them very difficult, what are your tips for kind of fixing or how do you get through those blockages when you get really stuck with a puzzle? How do you revisit the puzzle, or how do you change your thinking to sort of fix it?
As the less expert puzzler here, I can take that. One thing that's really great to do is to physically walk away from the puzzle. If you're on the app, shut that phone down. If you've got it on paper, just fold it over, go away from it, because then once you've stared at it so long, your subconscious gets to do this kind of magical thing where it kind of brews and percolates, and suddenly, because you want to get your brain to the answer from another angle somehow, right? So if the I can't, if if the answer is like banana, but it's clued in some, curious way about slipping, and you just can't think of it for some reason, you really want to walk away, and then something else in the atmosphere will trigger it, and then you're like, oh, right, that relates to this clue I was thinking about. So for particular clues, I truly think that like subconscious magic is the way to do it. To get better at crosswords as a thing, I think the real answer is just do more crosswords.
But I like the mystical answer, really. It's just, yeah, let your subconscious do its mystical thing, and the answer will come.
Yeah.
Is that your...
That's, if you're stuck in something, don't assume that everything you filled in is correct. So that's an important thing to step back and think, is it possible that something I filled in is wrong? That can get you unstuck. Yeah. And then Adrian's tip is the other thing that works. I had a professor once who compared his mind to an old-fashioned slide carousel, where it keeps going like this and the slides drop down. And he felt his mind was like that. And if you don't think of an answer at one point, the carousel's in the wrong spot. And you wait till the carousel goes a little and the slide drops in and boom, you're off and running again.
Do we have an online question?
This question is from Barbara. Does Will have any plans to write his memoirs?
Wow.
Oh.
No, I'm too busy to write memoirs.
Confessions of a puzzle editor at the New York Times. I can see it now.
Memoir and puzzles.
Memoir and puzzles. Yes. Hi.
Hi, I have a question. We talked about the app a couple times. With more and more folks in the younger generations not receiving print media subscriptions, but they're going and getting their news from social media or different apps, how do you two think about the discoverability in the future of crosswords for younger generations?
Interesting. There are some things in print media that don't transfer well into digital, but crosswords have translated very well. And more people are doing them. I already mentioned the Times has more than 750,000 subscribers for the digital version. So, and there are so many terrific puzzle crosswords that you can get online now. The New York Times has so much great competition, including from independent puzzle makers. They just make a puzzle, put it online, anyone can get it for free, and there's a lot of terrific puzzles out there.
And I think your first point about the puzzle always remains true across generations. I teach first year writing at college, and I teach a course that's kind of based around games, and I ask students on the first day, what's your favorite game? And I expect them to say some obscure, really like out there video game I haven't heard of, and sometimes it is. More often than not, though, it's chess, it's Monopoly, it's Uno, and it's crosswords. Like, it's back to these, the most classic forms are the ones that are thriving.
I will say as a Cuban and also dominoes. Okay.
Yes.
That's what I play with my daughter, and she beats me. She's 8. Do we have an online question?
This question is from Wendy. For Will, pen or pencil?
Erasable pen.
Nice. I think this will have to be our last question if we have another one in the auditorium down here.
Yes.
Yes.
This is more about Aesop than Pythagoras, and about riddles and literature more than about counting. But did Aesop write riddles? And before Aesop, both Aesop and Pythagoras, I'm pretty convinced we don't pass. With the little d. Before Aesop, if he didn't write riddles, who wrote riddles and who made puzzles?
Well, I mean, if the crossword is a baby in this field, puzzles and riddles have been around ever since language started. I think as soon as you figure out how to put letters together, the first immediate instinct is, I want to play with those letters. I want to do something with them. You see riddles in the Bible. You see riddles in every ancient culture, every ancient text and oral history is just riddled with riddles, for lack of a better way of putting it. So I think the instinct and the intuition to say, here's words, here's language, let's play with them, that's always, because words are just fun to play with. I don't think there's anything more, it's fun. And so therefore, we want to play with language, and we always want to keep evolving the ways we play with language too. So it's impossible to divorce, like the word read and the word riddle are often the same etymologically. It just goes back to the same root.
We have run out of time. I want to thank you so much, Adrian and Will. This was an absolute pleasure. And thank you so much, everyone who submitted questions, and everyone who came this evening or is watching online. It's been a real treat to be here in the Coolidge Auditorium. And please continue enjoying the National Book Festival at loc.gov/bookfest. And let's close with another gem from the library's National Jukebox titled Crossword Puzzle Blues.